I view myself as an educator, a public educator. I mean, I've spent half of my adult life in government, the other half in universities. I've written a lot of books, and I've done a lot of, I've even done a documentary. I feel that I have a personal obligation as a public educator to tell the truth as best I can. It's a very tiny role. I mean, I have nothing of a megaphone, but I'll do what I can. I think this is a time in the nation's history when all of us have a very dramatic personal obligation to do what we can. Donald Trump is not just a conservative president. He's not just another George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan. He really does represent a new and much more dangerous and insidious threat to democratic, small d, government. I think what Canadians need to do, because they have some distance, literally and figuratively, is to make sure that their friends and relations in the United States are reminded that this is not normal, that in fact what happens in the United States has a spillover effect around the world, and also that we in the United States cannot simply passively accept what's happening, that we've got to be citizen activists. We've got to actively, vocally, organizationally oppose Donald Trump. You know, when I talk like this, in the American media, it's very easy to dismiss what I say as just partisan talk. I mean, after all, for 50 years, I've been involved in Democratic administrations. It is much more valuable for Republicans to make the point that I just made than for me. And I keep on hoping that prominent Republicans will come out and spread the alarm about Donald Trump. The mainstream media are belatedly catching up. For a while, they were reporting every Trump tweet and covering it as if it was news. Lately, I've noticed they are not. And they are not even quite as distracted by outrageous Trump statements as they were before. But nevertheless, there is sort of this news of the day phenomenon in which the mainstream media often seem to lose track of the big story. For example, the biggest story recently that requires still a lot of attention is the intelligence community concluding with 17 separate reports that Donald Trump's aides and others associated with him and his campaign had frequent contacts with Russian operatives before the election and after the election. Now that is a gigantic issue, a gigantic story. But if you ask most Americans on the basis of what they've heard or read over the last several weeks, they probably, you know, it's somewhere in the background. It's not something that they are talking about. I think people believe that there are fewer checks in power that can restrain Donald Trump than there actually are. For example, he has been issuing executive orders that are not really executive orders at all. They are simply requests to Congress to take certain actions. In previous administrations, those would not be covered at all, but he has dressed them up as executive orders. They are being translated into headlines, looking as if he is actually deciding things, big things, when in fact it's still got to go through Congress. And there's not, even with a Republican Congress, there's a lot of opposition to several things that Donald Trump wants to do. So the public is being hoodwinked into thinking that Donald Trump is more powerful than he actually is. I think that democratic institutions are inherently fragile, more fragile than we normally, every day, expect they are. We kind of take for granted in the 21st century that after all, these institutions have been present and they've been functioning for most of our lifetimes. In living memory, we do not recall fascism. We don't remember what happened with Mussolini or Hitler or Franco or Stalin. Our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents had that experience, but most people alive today don't. And therefore, we assume a permanency and a strength on the part of these institutions that those who lived through the 20s and 30s really understand or understood then. These institutions don't have. They are fragile. They need continuous attention.